Hi everyone, welcome to Atomic Insight. As you know, research administration might be the only profession where success is measured by what never happens. The grant that wasn't lost, the audit funding that never came. Today, my guest has spent over 28 years inside the invisible work. She's the founder and CEO of Purple Sheep Consulting, and today she's here to make the case that research administration isn't just support, but the backbone of the university. So let's get into it.
I'm here with Dr. Rashonda Aris. So good to have you on the show, Rashonda. Why don't you take just a minute to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. First and foremost, I am Dr. Rashonda Harris. I'm the founder and CEO of Purple Sheep Consulting. I have been in the field of research administration since 1998, which makes it about a little over 28 years now. And so my research and administration experience spans pre-award, post-award, compliance, finance, and institutional leadership. Throughout my career, I've really had the pleasure to work at some amazing institutions, and I've served in leadership roles across higher education and academic health systems. I've also had the opportunity to teach the next generation of research administrators as faculty. And I'm going to pause and start that over because I just was a little tongue-tied.
Yeah, no worries. Go ahead.
I am Dr. Rashonda Harris, founder and CEO of Purple Sheep Consulting. I've been in the field of research administration since 1998, which gives me a little over 28 years in the field. I've had the pleasure of working at some really amazing institutions, and my experience spans pre, post, compliance, and institutional leadership. Throughout my career, I've served in leadership roles across higher education and academic health systems, and I've had the opportunity to teach the next generation of research administrators as faculty in graduate research administration programs. My research and professional work focuses on common themes about visibility and examining whether the experiences of leaders, specifically Black women leaders, because I am a Black woman, leaders, their experiences within research administration. And I help institutions strengthen their research infrastructure or advance the profession of research administration. And I am very passionate about making the invisible feel visible. At Purple Sheep Consulting, we help institutions build stronger, more compliant, and suitable and sustainable research enterprises through consulting, training, professional development. Much of our work centers on helping organizations recognize that research administration is not simply a support function, it's critical to the institutional infrastructure that enables research, protects funding, and also mitigates risk and ultimately helps advance discovery. And so I'm excited to be here today because this conversation is about the profession that impacts research administration at every institution, yet often remains unseen. And I think that's time we change that.
Absolutely. And one of the main themes that we're going to be talking about today is the invisible work and how do we make it more visible. What does that mean is really enabling the profession and making sure that people being seen, heard, but also in terms of results, how do we measure? How do we make sure we put, people in a position where they can succeed moving forward? A lot of the I guess when it comes to the profession, it's probably one of the few profession where success is measured by the problems that never occur. This is something that we talked about off mic, but the grant that wasn't lost, the audit funding that never happened, the compliance issue prevented before it became an headline. There's so much of that value that lives into the prevention, the risk mitigation, and continuity. I guess I'm just curious, walk us through first what is the invisible work and what does that look like in the day-to-day of a research administrator?
Sure. So research administration sits at the intersection of research, finance, and compliance operation and strategy. So on any given day, research administrators are helping faculty pursue funding, negotiate agreements, review budgets, monitoring expenditures, or ensuring compliance with sponsor requirements, while also managing reporting obligations and solving problems before they become a crisis. So, what makes the work invisible is that most stakeholders only see the outcome, many of which you mentioned. They see the funded grant, a successful clinical trial, a research partnership, or a report submitted on time. What they don't see are the hundreds of decisions and reviews and conversations and controls operating behind the scenes that really make those outcomes possible. Research administration isn't simply supporting research, it's enabling research.
Totally agree with you. And there's definitely a difference between supporting and enabling research. What doesn't change when we think of research administration as an institutional infrastructure rather than a support function? What are the core differences, or how do you see it differently?
I think the core differences are that when we look at research administration, we know what that means, right? We see we are in the field and we understand the language and we speak an acronym. There's so many different things that you have to cut through. So from the surface, it may seem maybe it's a little bit more complex because yes, one, it is, but two, what you're not seeing is that there is a lot of analytical work, a lot of thinking, a lot of decision making. And I always refer to research administration as a profession that is a relay race because I may have to pass the baton to you, who then you have to pass the baton to someone else because it takes many of us to be involved to complete one action. So it's a number of different things that comprise and make research administration what it is. But the work that doesn't get the attention is that everything is going right. We get attention when something's going wrong, and then you hear about it in significant audit findings, and a institution is headlining on the local news or the evening news in an unfavorable way.
And how do you think the way we describe how that work is being labeled or perceived change how people value it? So you said like passing the baton and everyone has different responsibility. And let's be honest, wear many hats, especially in that landscape at the moment. How does describing that work impact how we're going to value it moving forward, or how maybe it is being devalued sometime by the way we also label it? Yeah, can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. Titles matter because language shapes perception. And so when someone is called a grant processor or support staff member or back office employee, it frames the work as transactional. And in reality, many research administrators are managing institutional risk. They're stewarding millions of dollars, they're advising leadership, they're negotiating agreements, and they're supporting strategic priorities. So those strategic priorities are missions of the entire university. And so the profession often operates at a much higher level than the title suggests. And so recognition starts with accurately describing the complexity and the value of the work being performed.
How would you describe that work and that complexity?
The work and the complexity, I think it depends because as we know, with research administration, there are many lanes that you can swim in, right? And so the different lanes also describe the different areas of it. And so if we looked at how to explain what we do, we would need to first have consistent titles across so that you can then create I guess, awareness for just how many of us there are. Because a lot of people think there might be one or two, but research administrators, we are in the thousands in this field, and we spread globally, not just in the United States. So I think to bring the visibility that's needed, it needs to have some structure and organization of what our titles are and clear progressions to see what it is. So I'll give you a great example. If you work your way from a entry level to a C-suite, one would assume that you climbed the ladder and you worked and you came in the entry level, you went into management, you leveled up into management, but you don't get to see those opportunities within research administration because you might see someone who looks like a simple grant administrator, but when in fact they are responsible for a program project that has over the sites and programs that are being reported under that single project. So it's very complex, doesn't quite match the title, but you can see the need for why transparency and understanding what each person does and clear pathing to level up or to advance would be significant in helping to do that and create visibility.
I think for me, it's really clear why it matters for our research administrators. And I do have an idea, and I'm all for it as well on the faculty level and leadership level. But how can you explain, or could you explain why it matters and why is it important that this work gets valued or labeled in a different way for faculty and also for leadership? And do you think it's just one big bucket that it's just going to help the profession if we do it properly? Or do you think there's different ways that we need to go about how do we present research administration and the people that build this profession to the faculty versus leadership? Where does that land?
So I think if we think of research administrators as infrastructure rather than support, that will be the first one, right? Because they are here to create the opportunities for our scientists and research brilliance to be showcased. And that happens by our institutions hiring the best and the brightest. And so infrastructure is something that institutions can't operate without. And that's what research administrators are. So support functions are often viewed as optional or secondary, but research administration specifically, is far closer to infrastructure, because if research administration disappears tomorrow, awards could not be established, contracts would not be executed, reports would not be submitted, and compliance obligations will be missed. And then the funding will be jeopardized. That is key to it. And faculty create knowledge. Research administrators, they create operational environments that allow that knowledge to be funded and managed and protected. And so that distinction lands differently with leadership, because leaders understand infrastructure investments and they understand risk management and they understand sustainability. They just might not quite understand the depth that research administration has. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I want to surf a little bit on that idea of showing the real value to leadership as well, which sometimes I'll just take a personal example, but there are certain things that I say I value, but sometimes through my action doesn't show the same, right? So it's important that sometimes our action follows our words. And I think like for a VPR senior research administrator that's watching or listening to us right now, what metrics best capture the real value of research administration? Like how do we quantify that? How do you, and if you can quantify, and if you cannot, then how do you measure value? Because unfortunately, we live in a world that sometimes we need a report, we need some numbers, we need to, at the end of the year, look at the progress that we made. And yes, there's some qualitative behind it, but how do you actually measure what's tangible and how do you report to leadership so they can see the progress and they can, on the opposite end, value more your work?
Sure. Historically, we've measured volume, but I think we need to measure impact. Metrics should include research dollars supported, proposal success rates, not just the number that we submitted, how many out of that number were funded, time to set up an award, contract execution deadlines or timeliness, delinquent report reductions, audit findings prevented, compliance risk mitigated, faculty satisfaction, research continuity indicators. And the question really shouldn't be, how did we do the work or how did we do? The question really should be, what institutional outcomes did we make possible? Because that's when it becomes appreciated. Nobody cares that we submitted 500 FSRs in the past year on time, but what did that equate to in terms of institutional outcomes? That's what is valued.
We're going to be talking a little bit more about AI, but I just want to do a quick parenthesis on your point here, where I think there's a shift right now in the economy and the workforce where people are less concerned about the actual process and are more concerned about the outcome. And I think a lot of it is due to AI, whereas I don't really know how that works behind, and I don't really want to know how that works behind, but I want to make sure I get the right outcome, either you're using an LM or a platform. So do you think that this shift needs to happen because we're also going through a kind of like technological revolution? Do you think these two are linked together, or do you think like separately this is just an industry or this is a profession that hasn't been necessarily impacted in a long time, or we haven't changed the way that we've been doing it for a long time and it just needs like a refresher? Yeah, just curious if you think there's a link to the technological revolution that we're going through, or do you think this is something that's linked to other concerns or opportunities in the field?
So I would say it's actually both. And here's why: because since I've been in research administration, especially since I've been in leadership, I've always worried about the outcome. Because if I'm getting my invoices out timely, my reports are being submitted timely and accurately, one, I'm saving lots of resources and institutional reputation, which is an outcome, right? Because institutions want to be perceived as the best and the brightest, having that excellence. And that excellence comes with those stats. So those are the outcomes that are made possible by having and capturing those metrics. Moreover, we are definitely in a technological renaissance, if you will. I think about it like when the first dial-up came or the first cell phone, right? It was like, oh, you keep talking on those phones, it's gonna screw your brain up. Or why are you online? You would never meet people online. But now look at where we are. That's the only way a lot of people do meet people, right? They meet others online, and our cell phones, where they started out bigger, they've gotten significantly smaller, and they serve as almost small computers for us. I think about AI in the same way. And when people ask me about AI as it relates to research administration, one of the things that I always tell people is AI is not replacing us, but a person who knows AI will replace you if you're worried about being replaced, because that's where we need to true up the two together, and they need to become in sync so that they can work collectively. Why not utilize AI to capture your metrics more accurately? Then also analyze those metrics. What are the peaks? What are the lows? Where have we missed opportunities to improve or streamline how we are reporting or recording something that can give us leverage to see that when we make our submissions for new awards, we have a higher success rate in this area. Why is that? And being able to pinpoint that gives us more opportunities to be even more successful because we've identified that. So I say it's collective. I say both are actively working together because they are both focused on what the outcomes are. They can work together to strengthen the outcome.
And what do you think is the struggle behind collecting or measuring those metric and the impact? Like this is something that's been going on for years. I'm guessing that you've worked with a lot of teams that some are doing it better than others as well. So it's not to put everything in the same bucket. So maybe what do you see the successful teams do in terms of measuring metrics and their success versus the one that struggle a little bit more? What are the differences between these two teams?
I think the first challenge is that it is that data is everywhere. A lot of times the data sources are not centralized, and that may be related to your ERP system or the lack of understanding and training on how to use that and utilize it to leverage it for metrics. I can recall putting in several ERP systems at various institutions, and every single time, the first thing that I did was ensure that I would be able to extract data for metrics. But I'm a metrics person, and that's one of the things that I really enjoy doing. So I think I might have a different lens, but research administration touches proposal systems, award management systems, financial systems, HR systems, compliance. So you name it, it has many legs and arms. Trying to get the data out of all of those specifically is what is the challenge and why you see inconsistencies in how people capture metrics. Then the next part is, what do we measure? Typically, we're going to measure the easiest thing possible, the number of proposals, the number of awards, number of agreements processed. And they are good metrics and they're easy to count, but they're harder to connect to institutional outcomes because of exactly what I'm giving you. They're low hanging fruit. And then the third part I would say is prevention and difficulty to quantify, because the biggest challenge is, how do you measure the audit finding that never happened? Or how does the sponsor concern that was resolved before escalation get captured into a metric, or the subaward that was caught before the funds were ever spent improperly? Those things are not able to be weighted because they're one off. And then you have to create a matrix to even find out how you add value to them. So the highest value work is often left with no visible footprint. And the last part I would say is it's a shared ownership. Research success is really collaborative. And so when an institution receives an award for $20 million, who gets credit for it? Department, faculty, dean? The answer is all of them. Post award, everybody, they all get credit because they make that possible, but making that attribution is difficult. And so the challenges can become even more so where you have different leaders who care about different metrics, and you're trying to prioritize and bring up the top priorities to the surface so that people can get what they need. But faculty, they care about the proposal time and award setup time. The CFO might care about cash flow or collections and our AR. The provost might care about the growth and faculty production. But if you have a dashboard, it's still not going to meet their needs. So the problem is that you have to actually fill the visibility gap, because sometimes it's research administration has become very good at measuring what we do, but not always how we make what we do to make it possible. And so that's the visibility gap, and brings us up to our conversation about invisibility, because there's so much that is not captured. And I think that's where you have the opportunity to streamline operational metrics and financial metrics and then risk metrics, human metrics. If you break it down into those categories, then you're going to be able to find and connect them to outcomes.
I want to dive a little bit into those gaps and the and what the invisibility cost. So you mentioned like sometimes you don't even know, but I think deep down there is a way to calculate that or at least estimate what it costs you as an institution to miss out on certain opportunities or time lost or time wasted because you didn't go through the RFP properly and all these things that happen in the day-to-day of a research administrator. So how do you how does invisibility show up as a real cost and risk? And there's other obviously components to that. Burnout, retention, succession planning, operational effectiveness. There's just so many things we can talk about in terms of cost. But
Absolutely.
what would you say are the top cost and how do you measure those or how do you bring that up into a leadership conversation to maybe value your work more or just contribute to the global vision of your institution?
I think that right now we're seeing that invisibility is not just a professional challenge, it's institutional risk because a lot of what we were using, for example, our facilities and administrative rates, the recent cap that the current administration placed on it, where some universities had F&A rates as high as 70% or higher and had to now cap them at 15%. The F&A rate supports what? It supports the people who do the work, the research administrators. And so when leaders don't fully understand the functions, they often uninvest in staffing, technology, training, and succession planning. And so that's the institutional risk that we're seeing right here. That's what invisibility looks like. It looks like de-investment or underinvestment or resource reallocation from research administration because it's not fully visible to understand what it's supporting. And as you mentioned, it leads to burnout, turnover, delays, compliance concerns, and reduced institutional capacity, which is the cost that the institutions risk when they don't understand or have visibility problems. And the most expensive consequence isn't recognition, it's losing critical expertise that protects the funding, reputation, and operational stability. So that's what invisibility costs institutions.
From working with teams across the nation, what is the most common consequence that you see of not paying attention to the invisible work? And so either the most common or the most expensive one as well that you've seen working with teams.
So the most common, I would say, is the loss of resources. And when I say resources, I'm talking about research administrators. So when an institution has lost funding because it's not clear what their research dollars were allocated to, or that F&A rate where, how that, just think about it like this. If we knew offhand that you can go and search and know that the $5 million in F&A costs supported 1,500 research administrators. That's a different perception versus where is this money going? Institutions are just lining their pockets. People in research administration know, especially in leadership, we know that we actually operate at a deficit. Research administration is cost reimbursable, meaning we've already allocated the cost, paid it out, and now we're getting reimbursed for that cost. And we're not always reimbursed at the level that we've taken in, but the reputation and the prestige and what we're working for in terms of the greater good of humanity in our various scientific studies is worth it. And so the most common casualty of invisibility is lost resources and lost excellence for institutions. When you have to lay off, typically they lay off people who've been there the longest because they make the most money. And that's when your institutional knowledge leaves the institution. And when that knowledge leaves the institution without any way to transfer it, that is a huge loss for institutions because now they have to fill the gap and they don't have the time or resources to fill the gap because they're downsizing, meaning onboarding is not going as it should because they don't have the resources to do it. So I would say that would be the most common that I would attribute to it.
Do you have a story or specific case study that you've gone through that speaks either to that specifically, that pain point, or on the other side, like maybe a case study or a perfect example on how someone was in that situation, but as a team turning it around, and what does that look like today?
Sure. I actually recall a time where I worked at an institution, a state school, and at that state school, I was stressing to leadership, and I was actually teaching them, and I guess I would say making the invisible visible to them because they didn't understand, why do you need another FTE? What is it that you guys are doing? You only have a few grants, and but it's not that much that you should need all these resources. So what I did is I actually worked with the capstone program for the MBA to become a case study, my department on resources. So what we did is I provided them with my org chart and our staff FTE count, the titles, and our research portfolio. What they did was compare us to like institutions and also look at us one to one in terms of who did the task and why they did the task and what their portfolios look like. Now, that may seem like a lot of jargon, but I'll tell you what came out of it was I was able to get 6 new FTEs just on my post award team and 2 separate offices, one for cash management and another one for reporting. So that's just to show you that when you make the invisible visible and they can see the value in it, you can get the resources because the metrics didn't lie. The metrics showed that my average post award person had 3 times that of their counterpart at an institution with similar funding. And that right there, one to one, showed that there was an unequal balance and risk associated with that unequal balance. And so that's a great example of where visibility has value and the metrics tie into that, showing that the outcome is improved performance. What we were able to do is we reduced our AR, we reduced our reporting delinquencies, meaning we went down, on average, we went down, and this is no joke, almost 50% that we reduced our delinquency in reporting just because we had a dedicated team to it. So that goes to show you the impact that metrics can have, as well as when you tie it to the outcome. And we got more funding because we were on time.
Yeah, talking of extreme workload and FDEs, just with the promise I was going to come back to the AI stuff, with the pace of policy change and just rising complexity in general as well, it feels like it is like the right moment to talk about where the field is heading and what should be automated, what should be kept, where do you put the human in the loop versus what can you again delegate or build around. So in your perspective, what work in research administration should be automated and what should never be automated, or what or where should someone focus on right now?
Sure. I will say we should automate it, of course, repetitive administrative tasks. That's low hanging fruit. We should not automate judgment. And that's where humans will always be needed because some things are not simply black and white. They have a little bit of color. And even when they seem gray, we need to unpack that. And that's something that is based in judgment and cannot be automated. But AI can also summarize our policies, but AI cannot replace accountability. AI can identify patterns, it can't replace ethical decision making. And the future is not human versus AI. The future is skilled professionals learning to use AI to increase capacity and improve consistency and also make better decisions. I use AI for just about everything that I do, but this advantage that I have is I've been in this field for 28 plus years. I have depth that I pull based off of when I need to. And I can challenge AI to think differently because there are some things that I've asked it and it is incorrect. It doesn't know. And that's where we can work together to increase that capacity and improve inconsistencies to make better decisions. So that's what I would say. AI is something that should enhance stewardship, not replace it.
I think you're absolutely right. And there's probably 1,000 examples in our day to day where it's already automating and helping us and we don't even know. So I think it's just embracing next steps and just understanding it properly and keeping your judgment in the loop, like you said. I'd love to just like end on a more forward-looking note as well. Your ideas, your recommendation on how do we close that visibility gap? How do we make the invisible visible as well? So between reframing the language, building metrics, fixing the titles, telling more stories as well, where should leaders focus first for the biggest impact? And if an institution wanted to start making this work tomorrow, what's the first step you would tell them?
I think Like I said, you heard me say that I think the gap of invisibility begins with title consistency and transparency. And so I would say that we close the visibility gap by changing what we measure, how we communicate it, and what we celebrate. First, we have to really stop talking about activities that are just activities. We need to start talking about the impact. Instead of saying I processed 500 proposals or negotiated 200 agreements, we could explain how much funding was enabled, how much risk we mitigated, or how much institutional capacity was created. The second thing I would say is institutions really do need to start making research administration visible through the metrics and the storytelling. We have stories for days and days. In fact, that you heard me share my story that I just did, but I could easily share another story about how institutional risk was mitigated, where we had a PI who was doing something, and based off of our internal controls that we had, we were able to mitigate that risk, and it never reached the sponsor or outside of our institution. Those are things that are important. Those stories really do help. And if we do that storytelling and we have leadership conversations, they will get a better understanding and appreciation for what we do. If we publish reports highlighting research discoveries, or that would be another way. And we could also highlight the infrastructure and the professionals that made those discoveries possible. It's a number of things that are simple, but we just don't think about them because they're so simple. But we need to professionalize the profession. Like I said, consistent titles, career pathways, continuing education, certificates, leadership development, all of that helps. The more programs that we have at institutions, because we're all in higher educations, that show research administration, that give it that those opportunities and programs give it transparency and give it visibility. Johns Hopkins or CUNY, they have research administration degree programs. Those are wonderful. We need more. We need to be able to see those so that we can gain visibility of the profession so others will be able to see it. And that's just where we start.
I think you expressed really well what the profession needs. I'm curious from your point of view. You've been a research administrator, you've been in the field for 28 years. There's probably what the teams need, but what do you think research administration wants right now, especially given the last year or so where it's been super complex, it's been shifty, a lot of laid off, a lot of extra workload as well. So there's one thing about being recognized, there's one thing about being able to measure that output, the outcome, the impact as well. But what do you think the different teams want? What do you think research administration really wants, rather than there's obviously a short-term need of being recognized, measure that impact, but what do you think is going on through everybody's head right now as, hey, this is what I want in my day to day?
I would say the first thing that they want is stability. The next thing I would say is clarity. And then third, I would say recognition. And the reason for that is because if you looked at a seat at the table and you thought about where you wanted to be, you would want to have you would want to have that understanding so that the profession doesn't just say, hey, I want visibility. It wants influence. Research administrators want to be included in early conversations about research strategy, institutional risk, AI governance, research growth, organizational change. And it's not because they want status, but it's because they have the expertise that can help the institutions make better decisions, but they're not often spoken to. Things are happening at a very high level. And in order for research administrators to feel appreciated and seen, that's what they need. They need to have that stability. For years, research administrators have operated in constant change, regulatory, staffing, system implementations. It's like the constant project hop that you go from one thing to another. We've had AI disruption, increased compliance expectation, and people are really tired. The field wants stability, not stagnation, stability. And the last thing we wanted is to have to, keep proving that we are valuable. And so by bringing clarity, we can do that and transparency.
Appreciate the answer, and I think you're absolutely right. One of the reason we're almost at the end here, and it's been a wonderful time. And one of the reason why we do these interviews and all of our content is to help build a community in a place where research administrators can talk, can get some different perspective on their work as well. And I think what makes a strong community is not only being able to give back and give first, but also being able to ask when you need help. And I'm curious, what's next for you, Rashonda? And if anybody's listening right now, what would you ask from them? What do you need? How can people contribute to your vision, your mission? Is there anything that they can do to support your work?
You know what I would say? As a leader, I'm one of the leaders who I think about solutions. I'm not a person who says, "Hey, let's keep talking about the problem." I like to figure out how can we solve the problem? How can we really address what is happening? And so for me, I create that by creating solutions and offering opportunities. As an educator, that's exactly what I've done. And so for me, the future of research administration depends on three things: visibility, capability, and investment. Visibility is so institutions can understand the value of the work. Capability through continued education, professional development, and programs like My Purple Sheep CPE that strengthen competence across research life cycles. And then the investment in people who make the research possible every day, because research administration isn't overhead, it's infrastructure. And when we make the invisible work visible, we strengthen the entire research enterprise.
Thank you so much for that. And for anybody who would want to work with you, this is your time, a shameless plug, I like to say, but anyone who shares the same ideas, values, and would want to hear a little bit more about your expertise and either on their day-to-day or leadership level, what's one good reason for them to reach out to you and how can they get in contact with you?
Sure. So one of the things that I've become really increasingly passionate about is helping elevate the professionals and the field of research administration. And so that's really why I founded Purple Sheep Consulting and developed Purple Sheep CPE. Research administrators are managing millions of dollars of funding, navigating increasingly complex regulations. We just had a new change to uniform guidance. And so, yet, unlike the profession, there has been historically limited access to structured continuing professional education designed specifically for the realities of our work. And so Purple Sheep CPE was built to help close that gap through practical, complex, compliance focused, and institutional relevant learning opportunities, which we ground in our framework called CODE. And our code standard stands for competence oversight, documentation, and execution. And so, whether you're an emerging research administrator, a seasoned leader, or an institution looking to strengthen its research enterprise, our goal is simple: help people build knowledge and confidence needed to navigate complexity and lead effectively. And with all of these unfortunate, forces in play that require us to downsize, we're not going to be able to use professional development the way that we normally have been, which is to go to conferences and network with our friends. We need to have to bring it into our living rooms, and that's what Purple Sheep CPE is. So you can learn more at Purple Sheep Consulting, and I love to continue the conversation with anyone who is passionate about the future of research administration.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on the show. It was really a pleasure to have you on, and we're gonna make sure to publish more content together. I think this is just the start of a partnership. I'm really looking forward to be collaborating on different topics as well. And for anybody who's listening, we'll definitely drop in the description and on our website more information on how you can reach out to Rashonda, some of her past work as well. You can have a good idea on if this is a good fit or not. And yeah, anything else, Rashonda, before we close it up that you'd like to discuss or just tell our community?
Sure. So research at Purple Sheep Consulting, we are a life cycle shop. We do it all. We support your interim staffing, special projects, as well as your professional development. So come over and see us.
That's it, folks. If you enjoyed today's conversation, make sure you subscribe to our newsletter and check out our other webinars and interview for more conversation like this. We're always looking for new guests to collaborate on webinars, interview, and different resources. If that's something you'd want to do, just feel free to reach out. My name is Raphael, and this has been another episode of Atomic Insights. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.